Thanks very much, Mary, and thanks very much for inviting me to Donaghmore Historical Society to talk about one of your own. Charlie Donnelly's mum was Rose McCaughey, and she was from Donaghmore Parish, Clonavati. So it's great to bring the history to the local people. So we hand count just how many people know of Charlie Donnelly. Is he completely new? Yes. So we'll have a few people that know about Charlie Donnelly. Well, that's good to know. Yeah. One of the surprising things is that he's still he's not that well known as a person, yet his history and his legacy is there. So we're going to talk about that tonight. It's not an easy subject, the Spanish War, and countless books has been written about it, but today it's still a very much contested war, so it's still a very controversial war. Okay, so what we're going to take a wee look at tonight then is sort of like a background to the story of the Spanish War in terms of what was going on here in Ireland, and to really maybe look at what the conflict was in Spain, just very lightly, because it's still very much contested. And then we're going to take a wee look then at Charlie Donnelly and who he was and his legacy. All right, we'll make a wee start. So as Mary said earlier, this year marks the 90th anniversary of the outbreak of the conflict, while the months ahead will also commemorate the anniversaries of Irish members of the International Brigade who died on the Spanish battlefields in defence of socialism, democracy, and against the rising fascism. So when the Civil War broke out in Spain in July 1936, Britain, Ireland, America and Canada all adopted a policy of non-intervention. So despite this, many ordinary people from across the world saw the war in Spain as a fight for democracy. So very much reflective of that time and period in the 1930s around the world. Franco attempted a military coup, hoping to overthrow the elected government, but failed. But with the backing of Germany and Italy, he was able to force a military uprising on the people of Spain. But it took a long time because of the resistance. The democratically elected government, representing the ordinary working class people of Spain, were no match. So, like Spain, Ireland was also struggling with economic and social downturn. The Great Depression of 1929 had a knock-on effect on industry in Ireland. And no more was this seen in Belfast. So socialists such as Frank Ryan, George Gilmore and Charlie Donnelly were organising rallies and strikes. Across Ireland, trade unions were being organised to protect the rights of workers, and wealthy landlords were being held accountable for the poor living conditions in both Dublin and in Belfast. Now you see Charlie Donnelly's name up there right away. So we're talking about a young man who was about 18 or 19 at this stage, and he is right up there among the socialists. So in the context of Ireland, socialism was concerned with the workers' rights, trade union activism, anti-fascism, Republican socialism, and unity between Catholic and Protestant working class workers, and opposition to landlords and capitalist exploitation. However, socialist causes and the way they were conducted was not popular with the established hierarchies in Ireland, and this included the Catholic Church. When news came in fairly early on of the atrocities that were happening in Spain against nuns and priests, church leaders such as Cardinal McCrory condemned those taking up the socialist cause in Spain. And from his pulpit, he denounced them as Reds. Charlie Donnelly was active in the Socialist Party in London at this time, and he rallied working classes together in a common cause. In the midst of this negative propaganda coming out against the socialist cause, and before he himself could volunteer to go to Spain, Charlie urged Frank Ryan to keep the people informed of what was really going on in Spain and to recruit for the International Brigade. So this is a period around about 1936. Charlie Donnelly has been in London for a year, and he's very concerned about negative propaganda. So, in response to the criticism of Cardinal McCrory, Frank Ryan, a leading socialist, sets the record straight. May I assure your eminence that as an Irish Catholic, I will take my religion from Rome, but as an Irish Republic, I will take my politics neither from Moscow nor Maynooth. And that was very important, and that was published in the newspapers. And it was making a very clear sign there that the people who were standing up for the democracy in Spain were not to be tarred with this brush that they were communists or Reds. And we'll find out a wee bit later on why the Soviet Union had to step in to help Spain. So Ireland was deeply divided. Some of the Irish opted to fight on the side of Franco, as per the Catholic Church, and they were called the Irish Brigade, while others, like Charlie Donnelly and a very much smaller minority, joined the International Brigade to fight against Franco and fascism. Ireland, just like Spain, was deeply divided. So you can see there in that image, you have over 200 men from Ireland joining the International Brigade to fight against Franco and fascism. They fought on the side of the democratically elected government, and of the 200 that signed up from Ireland, 70 were from Northern Ireland. Propaganda, however, against the godless Reds meant that approximately 700 men enlisted under O'Duffy to fight on the other side. So effectively, you're going to have Irish fighting against Irish in this conflict in Spain. The civil war in Spain was very much convulsed, was very much contested, and it was almost 50-50. And as a result, Ireland would pass legislation forbidding the Irish from fighting in Spain. In February 1937, the Irish Parliament passed the Spanish Civil War Non-Intervention Act of 1937. And this is a key time because at that period we've already lost Charlie Donnelly and many other of the International Brigade. Britain, for themselves, formed a non-intervention committee. Now, many saw the fight against fascism as very much an international issue, and a lot of the socialists at that time were also internationalists, so they could see the rise in imperialism, the rise in fascism, which of course came to be with World War II. They could see this in the years around the Spanish War. So approximately Britain and Ireland sent 4,000 in total, and 200 to 300 were from Ireland. So an approximate figure of around about 200. Now, what about Spain? So historically, Spanish society was deeply divided between opposing political and social forces. So on the one side, you had the wealthy landowners, the conservative elites, and sections of the religious hierarchy, many of which supported this authoritarianism and aligned themselves with the fascist movements emerging across Europe. On the other side, there were those small farmers, peasants, advocating for socialism, workers' rights, land reform, and greater social equality. And, reports at that time would have equated the farmers working in Spain as very much like slave labour, earning very, very, very little. So these divisions in Spain created profound instability within Spain. It's important to remember too that in terms of World War I, the Great War, Spain actually officially declared themselves neutral. So the political tensions and competing loyalties that developed in the years following the Great War did leave Spain increasingly fractured and vulnerable to conflict. So they're very much on their own, they set themselves apart. So a little picture just to show what we're starting to look at. So these are representatives of the elected government, the democratically elected government, securing their village. So many saw Spain's war as our war. a military uprising led by General Franco, supported by fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, drew both Protestant and Catholic men from across the north and south of Ireland into the international brigades. The men were united in their beliefs on the power of socialism and working class solidarity. So these men were committed anti-fascists who already had established some knowledge around socialism and trade unionism, and they saw the struggle in Spain as part of the wider fight against oppression and inequality. So despite, as I said earlier, this policy of non-intervention, many people felt it was their duty to go out to Spain in defence of the democratic elected government. So one of the reasons would have been that their own government had taken a non-intervention stance. So who was going to help these poor Spanish people? And even though Germany and Italy in principle agreed to non-intervention and non-participation, very quickly they stepped in and were creating this military uprising and supporting with tanks and aerial defence as well. Another reason why you have Protestants and Catholics come together in Ireland, that despite their own backgrounds, they were very much united by this shared political ideology of socialism and trade unionism, the fight for fair pay, working class rights and tenant rights. They all had this common conviction that the war in Spain represented a wider struggle to safeguard these rights. So in cities such as Belfast, many socialist and labour activists prominent in the Republican Congress argued that sectarian division only benefited wealthy industrialists and the political elites because it kept workers divided against each other. So as we'll see in a few minutes, Belfast was at a very good juncture in terms of recognising solidarity that could exist between the working classes. Fortunately, World War II came in and that destroyed that. So you had a lot of people joining in solidarity. And they believed that this working class solidarity was more important than religious identity and therefore religious sectarianism. Now, this all came about successfully in Belfast during the 1930s, where Protestant workers joined socialist organisations, labour campaigns and anti-fascist movements alongside Catholic workers. And these groups were opposed to fascism, sectarianism, imperialism and economic inequality. And what was the turning point? Well, the turning point was the 1932 outdoor relief strike in Belfast. So if anybody doesn't know what this was, so the downturn economically and socially across the world had this effect in Belfast, who was very much an industrial city. And as a result, many people became unemployed because there wasn't a shipping industry and so on. But working class Protestants and Catholics came together to strike against the unjust outdoor relief system which had been set amidst this widespread unemployment due to this worldwide downturn in industry. That was a very unfair system. It was very cruel, in fact. And in fact, we could say that you could go back 100 years and see how during the famine time to put people out to build roads and build walls when they were starving was another example of the cruelty of this. Well, the outdoor relief strike was about the outdoor relief scheme, where only able-bodied men, married, were able to apply for outdoor relief. And outdoor relief was just simply about going outdoors and mending roads or building walls. But even though they were being isolated in this case, only married men could apply, they were still getting substantially lower than their compatriots in Scotland and England. Those who were unsuccessful, i.e. those who were single and those who maybe were very malnourished, could only go for the option of applying for indoor relief, and that was simply the workhouse. Now, so I'm going to include some little captures of what the newspapers were showing around this time. Okay, so we had a flourishing James Connolly club in Belfast attended by Protestant and Catholic workers. and that was in 1935. So this is published in one of the newspapers. So 2 James Connolly clubs with excellent membership are now working full blast to ensure a strong northern representation at the Republican Congress. One of our clubs is almost wholly composed of Protestant workers, and we hope in the near future to add such another club. Numerically, we are very strong here. So this is an example of what is happening in Belfast. Poverty and social injustice is very much there. One of the strongest articles around that time was the shocking case, which tells the story of a County Clare farm labourer who was charged for failing to send his children to school. And quite simply, it was because, and we can reflect on that here too in the north, the man explained that he couldn't afford the shoes for the children or clothing for them, and that his entire family were surviving on only 6 shillings and 6 pence a week. Now, this is what Charlie Donnelly is involved in. So not only was Charlie Donnelly heroic to take the calling and go to Spain, but he had already established a complete legacy of socialism and activism here in Ireland. In 1934, Charlie Donnelly is only 19 years old, and he addresses a housing protest outside Dublin's Mansion House. And he argues that the Dublin Corporation serves only the landlords rather than the workers, and says that the housing crisis can only be solved through organised tenant leagues and united working class action. And he takes on the Lord Mayor of the time, Alfie Byrne. And this is a wee write-up. And the crowds love Charlie Donnelly. They're there in their hundreds listening to him. And this is a boy born in County Tyrone from Dungannon. And we'll hear later on his own story as he moved down into Dublin. But he's only 19 years old at this stage. So Charlie Donnelly leaves Ireland in 1935, early 1935, and in London he's rallying the British working class and the Irish patriots to come together again in unification. So there are numbers and numerous articles where Charlie Donnelly is meeting large crowds of people. And so this is what he's doing, and he's only 19, 20 at this time. And here's an example here in Dublin, and this is 1935. So he comes back and he gives a talk. It's a public lecture by Charles Donnelly in October, and the subject is Ireland, England and the War. All workers invited. Key there. The men from the north and south of Ireland who joined the International Brigade believed therefore that the rise of fascism, Nazism and imperialism not only gave a grave threat to the Spanish Republic but also to their own democracy, workers' rights and civil liberties. So it's important that this context is made clear. This is how people felt here, and so given a reason why they went to war. Now to the work of many people involved in commemorating and remembering those who went to Spain. John Quinn wrote this book here and had been interviewing some of the people who did survive and relatives. And you have there a list of people from Northern Ireland who joined the International Brigade. And you can see the wide range of names from Bailey, Barr, right down to White there and Tomlinson. And this book does go into some of the stories of these people. And here in County Tyrone we had another gentleman, a Bill Murray from Auchnacloy, who also went out to Spain. So in terms of reporting, World War I had a lot of people reporting on it. So when the Spanish War came along, you had people like Ernest Hemingway almost clamouring to be sent out to report on the war. So this is the type of news that was going back to America, for example. So in the Chicago Daily Tribune, the headline is Mass Slaughter. American journalist J. Allen witnessed one of the earliest and most brutal atrocities of the Spanish Civil War. And this was very much at the very beginning, where Franco orders the mass killing of thousands of Republican supporters in mid-August. So these are the people who are supporting the democratically elected government. So writing for the Chicago Tribune, he described how Republican, socialist and communist militia members were slaughtered at the city fair, punished simply by defending the Republic against the forces of the military generals and wealthy landowners. According to Allen's report, the prisoners were marched into the town's bullring, once the stage for the famous Matador, at 4 o'clock in the morning, and were executed by machine gun. And an eyewitness later told him that the blood on the ground was palm deep. So this is the type of atrocities that we're seeing coming back. So around the same time, the Roosevelt administration announced that it would scrupulously refrain from any interference whatsoever in the unfortunate Spanish situation. But many people were lobbying, and in particular the American ambassador to Spain, Claude Bowers, continuously would have been in contact. Eventually, Roosevelt did say I made a mistake. You were right all along. So by January 1937, the Civil War is now in its 7th month. Another reporter reporting from Madrid to the New York Times witnesses the devastation surrounding the capital, praised the determination and courage of the Republican militia as they struggled to keep Franco's forces back. And these forces were armed with the latest military support from Italy, Germany and Portugal. Unfortunately, at this stage in early 1937, 7 months into the war, the journalist declared that there is not the slightest hope of a peaceful settlement of this dispute. So most members of the international brigades did not keep journals, and only a small number later wrote memoirs about their experiences. And books like this are very beneficial to hear the stories, as is this book here by Barry McLaughlin and Emmett O'Connor, who talks about the International Brigade, those who fought for the Spanish Republic. But many of those, however, who did return from Spain, and in fact money had to be raised to bring these war veterans back again home. But unfortunately, like many war veterans, they weren't given great regard. Some of them were actually arrested, some were sent over to England. So it was a hard time, and for years, right up till practically 1975, there would have been a lot of negativity towards those who served in Spain, until the media was open and people could actually see the atrocities of Franco. And 1975, around about that time, was when Franco died. It is often believed that had Charlie Donnelly survived the war, he might have produced one of the most vivid, insightful and visually descriptive literary accounts of the Irish experience in the Civil War. And we're going to find about that, and we're going to learn about that now shortly, why he had that ability. So Charlie Donnelly. So for those who do know him, I'm sorry to be repeating this information, but he was born in 1914, died in 1937. He was a poet, a journalist, a socialist, an internationalist, and also a volunteer with international brigades. But he has become one of the most significant symbolic figures in Irish anti-fascist memory and in the remembrance wholly of the Irish who fought in the Spanish War. Much of his legacy is preserved through the work of his brother, Joseph Donnelly, who published Charlie Donnelly, The Life and Poems. And this memoir was highlighted both Charlie's literary talent and his political commitment. Heroic Heart, a Charlie Donnelly reader, written by Kay Donnelly and edited by Jared Daw the poet, was subsequently published. Despite dying in Spain at just 22 years of age, Donnelly left behind a powerful body of writing and an enduring political legacy. Charlie Donnelly was born in Killybrackie in the townland, as Peter's down there will know, in Dungarvan, less so known now, but in that area down there, near Dungannon in County Tyrone. Donnelly later moved with his family to Dundalk and then on to Dublin, where Charlie would then see for the first time the actual suffering of the poor, and he had only been in his early teens. So he was seeing the workless and the working classes struggling to make a living. This is despite his father doing quite well. He was a successful farmer. He'd sold up the farm, had moved to Dundalk, he had bought a greengrocer's, was doing very well, and then was able to build a house out in the country area of the Moorlands. So he would have been of wealthy middle class background. He was one of thousands of young people from across the world who, despite the official non-intervention policies of their own governments, travelled to Spain to stand with workers and peasants in defence of the democratically elected government. Now, he couldn't have done that without already having some real social activism and awareness of the plight. So Joseph Donnelly's parents, or Charlie Donnelly's parents, were Joseph Donnelly and Rose McCaughey. So Rose McCaughey, as I said earlier, was from Clonavady townland in Kaleeshill here, in the parish of Donaghmore. And just the location, just where the house is, near the Coal Pit Road, Dungarvan, Killybrackie, and you can see there that the family homestead that was sold on, so it would have been not in that shape at that time. But the family were there in Killybrackie, Dungarvan, from the late 1770s at least. So that Donnelly family have a long history with Dungarvan. We're going to talk about his poetry now. So Charlie Donnelly belonged to a small generation of poets and writers who, shaped by the uncertain spirit of post-1916 Ireland and amid widespread unemployment and poverty in the 1930s, found, like many people, he had to emigrate from Dublin. And he left Dublin, as I said earlier, in early 1935. His reputation as a poet had already been established long before he left Dublin at the age of 20. Among his contemporaries, he was equally known for his poetry as the strong anti-fascist political stance he held. So he's a very strong, determined young man. It was his profound political commitment, the steadfast belief in justice and equality, that compelled Charlie Donnelly to act on his convictions. So while living in London, he would volunteer with the International Brigade and would fight under what I've termed there as Connolly column, but it was only really in the retrospect in the months after the International Brigade and recounting the stories did they refer to the Irish as being under the Connolly column. So it didn't exactly exist at that time in the trenches. He made arrangements to travel to Spain in late December 1936 and arrived in Spain in early January 1937. Now, it wasn't easy at that time because, of course, the policy and the law was no International Brigade membership and no going to Spain. So he actually had to get a weekend ticket to go to Paris, and he had to sign up already with the acknowledged person in London, and that was a communist office. The outbreak of war in Spain in July 1936 intensified Charlie Donnelly's convictions, and like many of his literary contemporaries, he was active in highlighting the plight of the ordinary people of Spain, the hungry, the landless, and he was doing this through journalism. So he was constantly writing and updating and making people aware of social injustices. So Charlie Donnelly leaves late December, arrives in Spain, and he was only really there a few weeks. During one of the worst battles, the Battle of Harima, sadly Charlie Donnelly is struck down. So on the 27th of February 1937, 2,000 miles from home, crouched among the olive groves of Harima, he was heard to utter, "Even the olives are bleeding." Moments later he lay dead, shot down by Franco's forces. He was only 22. have a little bit there just about the sadness to that legacy, which in many ways may have informed his poetry. His mother's mother, which would have been his grandmother, died tragically through lightning one night. She was struck by lightning and died outright. So just a wee bit there about the memorial stone to Charlie Donnelly and where it's located. Obviously, in many places we place blue plaques and things like that at people's houses. This one here is just on the road, not too far from Charlie Donnelly's house, so it's on the Edendork Road. And thanks to Peter down there, he did a wee bit of research for us. So one of the most famous songs of Christy Moore's is Viva la Quinta Brigada, recorded in 1984. So Christy Moore actually played, thanks to Peter's research, he played in Edendork Music Hall twice in the 1980s, solo once and also with the band Plaxty. And it's interesting because, as we'll hear hopefully through the audio here, the song is famous and always well received. The beginnings of a poet. So a poet is somebody who feels and who expresses his feeling through words. Over the next few years, deep in grief, at this time Charlie has lost his mum. His mum died as a result of sepsis after the last baby was born. Charlie's only 12 when his mum dies. So over these next few years, he is becoming more sensitive to what's going on around him. And he sees the plight of the poor and his own solitude. And during this whole time, he's only 12, 13 and 14, and he's writing short stories and poems. And these wee poems and short stories are being published in local magazines and other journals. So, as I said before, the family were in Dundalk for 2 years before they moved to Dublin in 1929. Now, an early poem from this time marks the occasion of Charlie Donnelly first hearing John McCormack. So this is a time in 1929 when John McCormack was out there doing concerts, and I was surprised to find an actual live concert from 1929. So again, bringing humanity to Charlie Donnelly. I'm going to just see, can I get this to play? So it's very faint, but it sort of gives you an idea there just of the love that he had for that music. And that's the poem he wrote. From out the stillness, accents sweet arise, sweet accents, accents tender so. And this is, well, it's okay, I'll turn it. And you can go home and listen to John McCormack quietly on your own. But this is a young boy who's discovered, he's sort of moved from the north into Dundalk and now in Dublin. And look at this, John Count McCormack. Now, so what does Dublin look like? So we'll see if I can play this as well. Yeah, so here's the sort of no audio clips of what Dublin is like at the time that Charlie Donnelly was living in Dublin. The horse and cart still there and some cars. It's a very busy city, isn't it? So it would have been a big contrast coming from Dungannon, Dundalk, and then going down here. Okay. Okay, so I've already mentioned that about just that he's really, putting words to his emotions and which becomes very evident as he gets older. So another poem published in 1931. He's only 17 years old, and it's the making of the structure of the poetry which he becomes known for. Give me thy speed, wild wailing wind, thy never-ending speed be me, that I may fly into the embrace of the sky, into the bosom of wide-eyed eternity, eternity whose darkness is nigh. So there's very much a case of him looking upwards, and I suppose we could assume that he is missing his mum, and he's very much aware of his own mortality. So he's around about 15, 16, 17. At this time he's become a very avid reader, and he's really exploring the libraries around him. And we know this because of his brother writing this memoir. But he doesn't go to school, and his dad doesn't find out for a while, but instead he educates himself. So he's going to the libraries and attending socialist meetings around the corner. And he meets Frank Ryan. And Frank Ryan opens up this world of socialism and left-wing politics. But he also sees the disparity between the rich and poor around him. So he's only a stone's throw really from the very poor where he is living in a more affluent area. So some of the places that he would have went to would have been the Workers' College near to where he was living in Eccles Street. And this is where he would have been hearing many of the leading socialists talking about plans and issues affecting local people. So his father remarries, and it is his stepmother who recognises that the young Charlie Donnelly has a talent and that he really shouldn't be wasting it just in the libraries and on an apprenticeship, for example, that he was going to be enlisted for. And so she encourages him along with the father, and he studies hard. So within 3 months he passes and he enters University College Dublin at 17. And this is an important period in his life too, because it's here that he will meet many of the contemporaries of his day. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So in Joseph Donnelly's memoir, he gives an account of Joseph Donnelly, of Charlie Donnelly. So one day Charlie was on his way to pay a bill of his father's when he came upon a heavily pregnant woman sitting on the doorstep of her house. She had just been evicted. And we can imagine this as being repeated and repeated all over the town. He noticed all her belongings around her. Overcome at such a young age of this sense of injustice, he forgoes the payment of the father's bill and instead finds out where the landlord lives and pays the overdue rent. So he's a student right in the middle of University College Dublin, and he's meeting a lot of the people that were contemporaries of his time, including Thomas MacDonagh's son, Donaghmore, and the poet and writer Leslie Dakin. He's nicknamed Shelley for time, but he was at odds with Romanticism, and he would debate on topics of social injustice which he saw around him. And you can see there a picture of his two friends, and that's a picture of Charlie Donnelly down there at the bottom in his teenage years. It would be at University College Dublin that he would meet Cora Hughes, and Cora Hughes was a goddaughter of Eamon de Valera. They shared a great interest in the same politics and social justice. Both would be out on the picket lines, working to show solidarity to the trade unions and those in the factories. And one of these was the bakery picket in 1933. Sadly, both would be arrested for picketing, would serve time in jail, weeks, for their beliefs, and tragically both would die young. So Cora Hughes was a great love in Charlie Donnelly's life. Cora continued to work for the poor in the poorer areas of Dublin's inner city, but she sadly contracted TB from her work alleviating the poverty in Dublin and died at 26. And it was only a few years after Charlie died in 1937. So just taking a wee look there, he's 18 when that poem was written. And you can start to see the formation of words there. However, Socialism is his great passion, and he's much more interested in socialism instead of his studies. So his time at university has largely been spent advocating for the poor and the working classes. But he's utilising his skill in writing, and he's writing prolifically for left-wing papers, advocating again and again the need for fair wage, trade unionism and collective socialism. His belief in the need for social and political activism took him further and further away from the ivory towers of academic life at the university, and sadly he would eventually drop out of his studies. Charlie believed in the decisive action, putting the pen down. He picketed in bakeries and other factories, showing solidarity. It would be an early insight into his decision that he would take a few years later, when again he would put down the pen to take up arms in Spain. Unfortunately for Charlie, protest in the streets, however, was not tolerated by government forces, and he was arrested on a number of occasions. But his father paid the fine, but on one occasion that wasn't forthcoming, and he was jailed for 2 weeks. But he used his time in prison to write poetry, and one of the lovely poems he wrote was The Flowering Power. It was almost like out of being restricted, he showed resilience and wrote poetry. But it was hard on him because he was denied books to read, and people didn't come to visit. And the reason people didn't come to visit was because they themselves were afraid of being arrested. So after sharp words from the fine mind, protest in court, the intimate high head constrained, straight lines of prison empty walls, a subtle beauty in a simple place. And one of the interesting things is that Charlie could really speak for himself, and he wasn't shy from deliberating and arguing for his case in court as well. So I suppose in ways to think about how he would be later on when he'd be writing poetry in the last couple of weeks of his life. The Flowering Bars does recognise and celebrate the human spirit of resilience and capacity for creativity, even in the face of adversity. Okay, so just taking a step back and just thinking about people like Charlie Donnelly and his friends. So in the aftermath of the 1916 Rising, many young people felt disillusioned. Politically, Ireland was inactive. For him, Ireland's bravely fought nationalism had given way to what he saw around him as individualism and capitalism. The futility of war also becomes a theme in Charlie's later poetry. It is not a coincidence that many of those who had fought for nationalism in 1916 were poets, artists, writers, sculptors. Among them were Padraig Pearse, Joseph Mary Plunkett, and Thomas MacDonagh. Thomas, son of Donaghmore, Donagh, son of Thomas MacDonagh, would also write a poem in Charlie's memory. So this is one of, I suppose, one or two of his poems are significantly of a critical stature, and sadly these were published in merely the weeks before he died. And he would have sent these poems home from the battlefield. So this poem, entitled Poem, was actually published in Ireland Today. So he'd sent it to his friend in Dublin, and it was a month before he died. So he was a published poet. So you can see what was going on in his mind, and the difficulty as a young man. He was throwing away his life. He knew that to go to war in Spain, he was risking everything. Between rebellion as a private study and the public, defiance is simple action only on which will flickers, cat-like for spring. Whether at nerve roots is secret, iron there's no diviner can tell, only the moment can show. And there is almost prophetic, simple and unclear moment on a morning utterly different and under circumstances different from what you'd expect. And so the poem goes on, and it's very much influenced by the war that is around him. Your flag is public over granite, gulls fly above it. Whatever the issue of the battle is, your memory is public. for them to pull a row with crooked hands, moist hands. And village reputations will be built on inaccurate accounts of your campaign, your name for orators, figure stone struck beneath damp Dublin sky. In delay and inaction, perhaps, on hillside and remote parish, outposts correctly placed, retreat secured to wood, bridge mined. So he's actually writing about, almost foretelling his own death there. Against pursuit, sniper may set you carelessly contoured. So he's talking about his position. So he has it well thought out, and he was very much into the strategy around war as well. So going back, so as I said, in early 1935 he would leave the conservative confines of Dublin, and he arrived early one morning at his friend Leslie Dakin's flat. Now Leslie Dakin went on to be a writer and a poet, and he lived out his life and also wrote children's nursery rhymes too. So in his own words he said to Dakin, "I had to get out of that bloody place. It's hard to stand the stupidity any longer." So like many poets before and after him, he would find literary expression, employment and opportunity in London. And he's very active again. So he's writing away for the Irish Front newspaper, and his two friends, Leslie Dakin and Ewart Milne, are writing with him. He's living in a place which is perfect for a poet, 21 Chaucer Road, Acton, London. And to date, the family are waiting to see what the local council will do in response to the request to have a blue plaque on that house. So he was there for a couple of years, and he was living with his brother. So that's 21 Chaucer Road in Acton, London. And it's very close to where he was working in Fleet Street. So he, in many ways, he achieved his dream when he went to London. He's a journalist on Fleet Street. But like everybody who has to emigrate, and particularly the Irish in London, he's very much occupied with the basic needs of employment to pay for rent and food. But he keeps busy writing for the Irish Front paper. Dakin would say that Donnelly wrote most of the articles. So there's very little time for poetry in these 2 years in London, and he would lament about this. So in the days and weeks prior to going to war, he regrets the time he wasted over the last 2 years. But the lovely thing is, you know, from the memoirs that were written and from the friends who kept the poetry, there is a substantial collection. So it's 2 years since I've written verse, he wrote to Cecil Socket 2 days before leaving for Spain. And here I am now, writing every day. I only wish I hadn't wasted the last 2 years. So around about that time too, just to put in context what was happening in London. So on the 4th of October in 1936, again, around about the time Charlie's deciding to go to Spain, the British Union of Fascists attempt to march through Lawton-on-Seine. Now, Leslie Dakin was Jewish, and he was from a minority group in Dublin, and so he would have had his friend with him. So this particular area of Lawton-on-Seine was heavily populated by Jewish immigrants. Large groups of people gathered to prevent the march from taking place. So this is giving you an idea of what's going around and happening at this time. There were 83 arrests, and a clash between the Metropolitan Police and members of the British Union of Fascists, led by Oswald Mosley. Okay. So again, back in Ireland, unemployment is high, and this is from a newspaper article in May 1935. And he continues to be active, and he's 20 years old at this time, so he's writing and publishing and speaking to large groups of people in London. So just again, lots and lots of wee newspaper articles that he has been involved in. Plans for London demonstration in July 1935 made the news in Ireland. But it was made a joke of, basically. So the newspaper ran an article referring to it, and you can see there, missing 2,800 demonstrators. So it wasn't easy being a socialist. Now, so around about this time, 1936, there is a lot of propaganda coming out against socialism and for Franco. But Charlie Donnelly is there at the front, talking to Frank Ryan and encouraging him to let people know what is actually happening. Okay, so O'Duffy, as I mentioned before, had led just under 700 men to Spain, and this was more than 4 times the volunteers from the other side. However, even though these men were vilified and criticised for joining the International Brigade, today there are more memorials across Ireland and abroad in memory of those who fought on the side of the International Brigade against fascism. In contrast, there is little marking for those who joined the right-wing and fascist O'Duffy's brigade. So just coming towards the end now and taking a wee look then just at the significant timeline for Charlie Donnelly. So date that he leaves is the 23rd of the 12th, 36. He leaves from Victoria Station to Paris on a weekend ticket. He has to meet a designated person and they go over the Pyrenees. Now, one of the reasons why I'm stating that as a timeline is that in many of the memorials and commemorations that happen every year since approximately 2007, people take these routes and they visit these routes and they remember. In January 1937, his poem is published, and in February 1937, a further poem is published, and we'll take a wee look at it towards the end. Now, unfortunately, the Battle of Harima was the worst and most bloodiest battle, and that's where Charlie Donnelly died. And it raged on for about 21 days, and newspapers recorded the significance of this. But in many ways, that battle in which Charlie Donnelly was engaged with did actually keep the road between Valencia and Madrid opened, where Franco had been trying to break off Madrid from the rest of Spain. So you can see there Ernest Hemingway there in the picture, so representing the Lincoln Brigade, and this is the people that Charlie Donnelly would have fought with during that 21-day battle. So 630 British and Irish soldiers from the International Brigade, many of whom who had only fired 15 bullets each in training, were ordered to attack a professional force 3 times larger than themselves. And of course, with the Germans and the Italians and the Portuguese, and they were supported by artillery and anti-tank trucks. So the assault ended in devastation. So there's a wee eyewitness account of Paul Burns, who was present with Charlie Donnelly on the 27th of February. And it was a suicide mission, and there was a lot of controversy around that mission. But Paul Burns says, "We run for cover, Charlie Donnelly, commander of the Irish company, because most of the other commanders had died in the days and the hours prior. So it was left to Charlie Donnelly to run this unit." Charlie is crouched behind an olive tree. He has picked up a bunch of olives from the ground and is squeezing them. Paul Burns hears him say quietly, "Even the olives are bleeding." A bullet got him square on the temple a few minutes later, so he died instantly. In total, 14 Irish out of that small number of International Brigade would die at Harima between the months of February to June 1937. And most died in that battle during February. So where Charlie Donnelly lay dead, around him has different memorials have been created, and you can see there just a few of them. Okay, so I'm just going to take you down to the Tolerance of Crows. Okay, so just a wee quick look at it. So this was written in a week or so before he died, and again is prophetic. Death comes in quantity from solved problems on maps, well-ordered dispositions, angles of elevation and direction. Comes innocent from tools children might love, retaining under pillows, innocently impales on any flesh. And so it goes on. But again, Poem and Tolerance of Crows are two of his more magnificent poems. Now, at the same time that this is going on, you had people like Nancy Cunard saying to the writers and poets of England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, are you for or against the legal government and the people of Republican Spain? Or are you for or against Franco and fascism? So she's asking an outright question. And some of our local poets give their answers. So Samuel Beckett said, up the Republic. So he made his thoughts clear. Sean O'Casey, I'm with the determined faces firing at the steel-clad slug of fascism from the smoke and flames of the barricades. Steve Spender, who survived the war, came back, was great in the amount of conversations he had in the years afterwards, really helping people to understand what was happening in Spain. So other authors is Katrina Goldstone. She writes about Charlie Donnelly and many of those who were exiled, including Leslie Dakin, and writes from the perspective of them as artists and writers. Now, a lot of work has been done here in Dungannon and across Madrid and in Spain, and so it's important that I do recognise that too. So memorials are here in Dungannon and Arima. The Friends of Charlie Donnelly, later reorganised as the Friends of the International Brigades Ireland, played a major role in ensuring that Charlie Donnelly's contribution was not forgotten, and they've done a lot of work around that. And you see the memorial in Dungannon as we looked at earlier. In Dungannon office there is a plaque of a picture of Charlie Donnelly created by Donaghmore's artist Seamus Keenan, isn't it? Yeah, okay, and that was done in 2004. There was a winter school on the 85th anniversary of Donnelly's death, so that was 4 years ago. So Charlie Donnelly will make 90 years of his anniversary of his death next year. The monument there dedicated in February 2010. So people from Dungannon went out there, from the from the Dungannon Council as well. And that's a picture there. Kindly, I was sent that by one of those who went out. And if you take a wee look at those stones, they represent one stone for every county in Ireland, to represent the amount of Irish that went across. In the Belfast International Brigade Commemoration Committee, they have a stained glass window in City Hall, and again honouring those of the International Brigade who died fighting Franco. Now, so I've done this talk now in different ways. So when I first did a talk on Charlie Donnelly, it was very much to reflect what the family wanted, and that was his talents as a poet and a writer. For many years, many years, the fact that their son and brother and uncle had fought in Spain against Franco, against the Catholic Church, what they believed, meant that the father couldn't even speak about his son's death. So any association with politics still is quite hurtful in the family. So when I first did the talk on Charlie Donnelly, I emphasised his poetry and his literature, and that can't be forgotten. But alongside that is his great activism and the amount of work he's put into in the past in helping the poor and involvement in trade union, all at a very young age. So I always take the olives with me, and people like John Quinn now use the International Brigade story that represented both Protestant and Catholics across communities in Belfast. He uses that as a way of opening up dialogue between communities and encouraging solidarity and removing sectarianism. So in a way, the olives that were bleeding represents also the olive branch, a symbol of peace where the threat of war, as we can see today, always remains present. So that's me, so thank you.